I have been hauling the broken and the dying through emergency bay doors for going on 30 years. In the back of an ambulance through 4 wars worth of training accidents, construction collapses, and highway carnage, and there is not much left that surprises me. I thought that was true on the Thursday evening I rolled 6 litters through the trauma doors at Stonebridge County and watched a float nurse get sent home in the middle of a mass casualty event. I was wrong. Her name was on the roster board when I pushed the first gurney through. One of 4 floats pulled in for the surge shift. Her last name, printed in blue marker, under the heading floor support. She was standing near the far wall with a prep tray, dark hair pulled back, scrubs the color of spruce trees, a badge lanyard, looped twice around her wrist the way field people do when they do not want it swinging into a patient's face. She was watching the board the way someone watches a weather system, not anxious, just reading it. I noticed her the way you notice something that does not match the room. The rest of the floor support nurses were clustering near the charge desk, following the charge nurse around, asking questions. This one was quiet and still, and positioned exactly where the incoming flow would put her closest to Bay 4. Bay 4 was the bad bay. 2 monitors, the crash cart, the broadest clearance radius. She had already figured out where the worst one would go. I did not have long to think about it. The doors swung open behind my second litter and Dr. Harlan Voss came through them at a walk that was almost a run, white coat flapping, already talking at the charge nurse before he had cleared the threshold. Voss was the kind of physician who narrated himself through a room. Loud enough that everyone in it understood who was in charge, loud enough that anyone who might have had a different idea understood they should put it away. He ran his eyes over the board, over the clustering staff, over the pre-positioned equipment, and then he spotted the float near the far wall. You, he pointed without breaking stride, toward the charge desk. Floor support. We are not going to need you in here tonight. Bay cleanup after we clear, that is your job. This is a closed trauma event. Go find a ward that will use you. She looked at him. Not hurt. Not indignant. She just looked at him the way you look at a weather report you already knew was wrong. She said, "Yes, sir." And she picked up her prep tray and walked out through the side door. I turned back to my litter. We had 6 men from a hard landing training accident, a Night Stalker training exercise. Helicopter came down wrong on a field approach. Blunt trauma across the board, 1 in critical. I did not have time to think about the float nurse. I had a critical patient and a trauma team loading into position around him, and Dr. Voss was already gloved and calling for readings. The critical patient's name was on his vest identifier, and I will not use it here. He was 23 years old and a crew chief, and he was crashing in a way that the numbers on the monitor told me was not going to be long. I had pushed fluids in the field, called his pressure twice, noted his breath sounds on the left side dropping out. I told the attending who received him exactly what I had told the field medic and exactly what I had seen in the back of that rig. Voss looked at the monitor, called for a chest x-ray, ordered a second IV line, and began working through his differential at full volume for the room. I moved to the wall. My job was done. My patients were handed off. I leaned against the supply cabinet and watched. 3 minutes passed. The x-ray came back inconclusive. Positioning had been off. The monitor showed pressure still dropping. Voss called for ultrasound. I watched the attending at the head of the bed and the resident at his left, elbow running through their paces. They were not wrong. They were just slow. The side door opened. She came back in through it, without announcing herself, without looking at Voss, without any of the theater that a lesser person might have used. She came to the side of the bed opposite the resident, set her prep tray on the cart stand with one hand, 2 fingers of her other hand on the patient's left lateral chest wall. She closed her eyes for 1/2 of a second. Then she opened them and said quietly and without drama, "He has got a tension left side. You need to decompress now. If you want the needle, I have it prepped." The resident looked up. Voss looked up. The room made the small, involuntary sound a room makes when something drops into place and nobody wanted to be the one to say it first. She was already drawing the needle. Voss said, "Nobody authorized you to be in this. 14 gauge, second intercostal, mid-clavicular." She said it the way someone reads a checklist. "I have done this in worse light than this with less equipment. Do you want to call it or do you want me to confirm? Nobody moved for 2 seconds. I have replayed those 2 seconds many times since that night. The monitor alarm was climbing. Voss looked at the monitor and then he looked at her hands. And then he said, confirm. She confirmed. She placed the needle, hands steady and practiced in the way that only comes from repetition in conditions that are nothing like a clean bay on a Thursday. And the rush of air told the whole room what the X-ray had not. The monitor began to climb the right direction before she had capped the needle. She stepped back, stripped her gloves, and began re-prepping her tray. She did not look at Voss again. I watched the crew chief's blood pressure come up on the monitor. I watched the resident who had been at the head of the bed write something on his clipboard, and then look at her, and then look back down at his clipboard. I watched Voss adjust the drip rate and call the next order at the same volume as every order before it, because a man like Voss does not have a volume for anything other than in charge. She moved between the bays quietly for the next 20 minutes. She was not the loudest person in the room. She was the most used. I was the one who saw her pull the kit from her scrub pocket when she re-prepped, between Bay 2 and Bay 4. The kit itself was standard, but folded over the outside of it was a patch no larger than my palm, worn at the edges, the threads of the embroidered crest, softened from years of handling. I knew that crest. I had seen it on the upper arm of every night stalker I had ever treated or trained beside. The winged sword, the scroll beneath it. I said nothing. I did not know what to say. The 6 soldiers stabilized. The crew chief held. Voss was at the charge desk, finishing his notes when the outer doors opened, and the rest of the flight crew came through. 5 men in flight suits, and 1 man behind them in dress uniform, moving with the particular quality of men who have learned to move together in the dark without speaking. They had come from the landing site, then the field staging area, then here. The warrant officer in dress uniform at the back was not young. He had the kind of face that records things without reacting to them. The crew chief in charge of the group stopped in the middle of the bay floor and looked around the room with the methodical attention of a man looking for something specific. His eyes passed over Voss at the desk. They passed over the residents. They found her at the prep station between Bay 2 and 3, he said, in a voice that carried to every corner of that room. Raven, she stopped what she was doing. Every soldier in that bay who could stand. The 5 who had come in with her patients, and the 3 who were ambulatory from the other litters, came to attention. They did it without being told, without a command. The way men come to attention when a thing is understood rather than ordered. It happened in under 3 seconds. The sound of it was the sound of boots on tile, and men straightening, and the silence after. Crew chief crossed the floor and stopped in front of her. She had turned to face him. He brought his right hand up in a salute that was not the lazy kind, not the perfunctory kind. It was the kind that meant something had been owed, and was now being paid. 11 men got home, he said. 4 missions. I wanted to say it to your face. Behind him, the warrant officer in dress uniform had come to attention as well, and he saluted and held it. She returned the salute. Straight, clean, no flourish. The patch was visible now at the edge of her pocket, the worn crest catching the bay light. She said, all of you were worth it. I looked at Dr. Harlan Voss. He was standing at the charge desk, holding his chart. He was not writing anything. He was not speaking. He was looking across the bay, at the row of men, at attention and at the woman they were saluting. And whatever he had believed at the beginning of that shift about float nurses and who belonged in a closed trauma event was leaving him in the particular slow way that true things replace untrue ones. Not all at once, not with ceremony, but without any stopping it either. I'm not a sentimental man. 30 years of what I have seen has made sure of that. But I have thought about those 3 seconds. The boots on tile, the silence that followed, the hands coming up, more times than I can count since that night. 11 men, 4 missions. A needle placed in the dark and again in the light, and the sure hands are the same hands both times. I rode out of Stonebridge County that night, knowing something I had not known when I rode in. Not about her, she already knew what she was. About the rest of us, who had stood in that room with her and had needed the showing.